You are lying in bed at night, and your body is exhausted. The room is dark and quiet. Everything around you is telling you to sleep. And yet your brain will not stop. It is replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. It is rehearsing a meeting that has not happened yet. It is constructing elaborate what-if scenarios for problems that may never exist. It is running and running and running, and you are just lying there, watching it go, completely unable to turn it off. Or maybe it happens during the day. You are in the middle of a task, something simple, something that should take 10 minutes. And somehow 40 minutes have passed, and you have not done the task at all. You have been thinking about the task. You have been thinking about what it means, what could go wrong, what someone might think of the result, what that says about you, and whether you are the kind of person who can actually do things like this. And you are left sitting there, not tired from effort, tired from thought. If this sounds familiar, I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever considered that the thinking is not the problem, that the trap is not the volume of thought, but the specific pattern it runs in? Because what I am about to show you is that overthinking is not simply a bad habit. It is a structural loop. And once you understand the architecture of that loop, you stop trying to think your way out of it, and you start doing something completely different. Let's start with what is actually happening inside your brain when you are caught in overthinking. Because the experience feels like mental noise, but the mechanism underneath it is far more specific than that. Your brain has two primary modes of operation. The first is what neuroscientists call the task-positive network. This is the mode your brain enters when it is focused on an external task, something specific, something with clear steps, something that demands your attention. Reading, solving a problem, having a conversation, doing physical work. When you are in this mode, your brain is directed outward. The second mode is called the default mode network. This is the mode your brain enters when it is not focused on an external task. When you are not actively doing something, your brain does not go quiet. It activates the second network, which is responsible for self-referential thinking, thinking about yourself, your past, your future, your identity, your relationships, your fears, your regrets. Here's what most people do not know. The default mode network is not optional. It is your brain's resting state. It turns on automatically whenever external demands drop below a certain threshold. And for the average person, this is fine. The default mode kicks in. The brain processes some internal material, and then when a task demands attention, the task-positive network takes over, and the default mode quiets down. But for people who overthink, something different is happening. Their default mode network is overactive. It turns on at higher intensity. It takes over even when external demands are present. And critically, it does not quiet down easily when it should. The result is a brain that is constantly processing inward, even when life is asking it to look outward. You are not simply a person who thinks too much. You are a person whose inward-facing processing system is running at unusually high capacity, almost continuously, and is resistant to switching off. Now I want to go deeper, because the neuroscience tells us what is happening, but the psychology tells us why. There is a specific cognitive pattern that underlies almost all chronic overthinking. Psychologists call it rumination, and it is important to understand exactly what rumination is because most people confuse it with thinking. Thinking moves forward. It takes a problem, processes it, reaches an output, and releases it. Thinking has direction. It goes somewhere. Rumination moves in circles. It takes a problem, processes it, arrives at no output, loops back to the beginning, and processes it again and again and again. It is the same thought, revisited endlessly, never reaching resolution, never releasing. And here is the key insight. Rumination does not feel unproductive in the moment. It feels like you are working on something. It feels effortful and serious, and like maybe if you just think a little harder, a little longer, you will arrive at the answer that has been eluding you. It mimics the feeling of productive thinking, but it never produces anything. It simply consumes you. Dr. Susan Nolan-Hoeksema, whose research on rumination spans more than 3 decades, found that ruminators are not actually solving problems. They are cycling through the emotional experience of problems without ever reaching the cognitive exit. The more you ruminate, the worse your problem-solving actually becomes, because the thinking itself is creating emotional activation that makes clear thought harder. To put it simply, overthinking does not help you think more clearly. It makes you think less clearly while feeling like you are thinking very hard. That is the trap. The effort is real. The output is almost nothing. Here is where it gets interesting. Because if rumination does not actually solve problems, why does the brain keep doing it? What is the purpose? This is the question that most people never ask. They assume that overthinking is simply a malfunction, a brain that has gotten stuck in a bad habit and cannot stop. But evolutionary psychology offers a different explanation, and it completely changes how you should think about this. The human brain evolved in an environment where the cost of being wrong about a threat was much higher than the cost of being wrong about safety. A false positive, believing there is danger when there is none, costs you energy. A false negative, believing there is no danger when there is, could cost you your life. So the brain developed a strong bias toward vigilance, toward scanning for problems, toward running threat simulations before events occurred so that the organism could prepare, adapt, and survive. Overthinking, at its root, is threat simulation. It is your brain trying to prepare you for every possible bad outcome so that none of them catch you off guard. The rehearsal of difficult conversations, the construction of worst-case scenarios, the endless examination of past events looking for what went wrong and what it means about your future safety. All of it is the brain doing its job, trying to protect you. The problem is that the modern world has given this ancient system an entirely new kind of threat to simulate: social threats, identity threats, reputational threats, existential threats. These threats are not resolved by preparation the way that physical threats are. You cannot rehearse your way out of the fear of being misunderstood. You cannot think your way out of the anxiety of being judged. The simulation runs, but no preparation ever feels adequate, so the loop continues. Your brain is not broken. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It just has not caught up to the fact that the threats it is simulating are not the kind that preparation can resolve. Now I want to talk about the identity layer, because this is where chronic overthinking becomes something much more personal than a cognitive pattern. Behavioral psychology is very clear on this. We act in accordance with what we believe we are, not what we are, but what we believe we are. And for many people who overthink, the thinking itself has become part of their identity. It has become the story they tell about how their mind works, and therefore who they are. You have probably heard yourself say it, or heard it said about you. He thinks too much. She is always in her head. They overthink everything. Said often enough about yourself or to yourself, these phrases stop being observations and start being definitions. They stop describing behavior and start defining identity. And once overthinking becomes identity, everything changes. Because now stopping the overthinking does not feel like a habit change. It feels like a threat to who you are. If I am someone who thinks deeply, carefully, thoroughly, then slowing down my thinking feels dangerous. It feels like becoming careless, becoming shallow, becoming someone who misses things that matter. This is why so many people who know they overthink, who recognize the pattern, who can see clearly that it is costing them, still cannot stop. It is not that they lack awareness. It is that stopping feels like losing something essential about themselves. Here's what I want you to consider. The capacity for deep, careful thought is not the same thing as rumination. These are not the same process wearing different clothes. Deep thinking is purposeful, directed, and produces output. Rumination is circular, reactive, and produces only more thinking. You are not protecting your intelligence when you ruminate. You are running your intelligence in neutral. The engine is on. It is loud and consuming fuel, but the wheels are not turning. Let me be completely honest with you about something that most people who overthink have never fully examined. A significant part of what chronic overthinkers are actually doing when they are in their heads is avoiding. This will feel unfair when you first hear it, because the experience of overthinking feels like the opposite of avoidance. It feels like engagement, like dealing with things, like taking things seriously. But look more carefully at what is actually happening. When you spend an hour rehearsing a difficult conversation in your head, you are not having the conversation. When you spend 3 days thinking about a decision, cycling through every possible outcome without ever choosing, you are not making the decision. When you replay a past event obsessively, analyzing every detail, imagining how things could have gone differently, you are not changing the event. You are not doing anything. The thinking is replacing the action. And the reason it does this is that action requires exposure to outcomes, which means exposure to the possibility of being wrong, of failing, of being judged, of losing control over how things go. Thinking, by contrast, is private. It is controllable. Inside your head, you can replay events perfectly. You can prepare for every contingency. You can construct a version of reality where you are always ready. Psychologists call this experiential avoidance. It is the tendency to avoid internal experiences, feelings, sensations, thoughts that feel threatening by staying in the realm of analysis rather than stepping into the realm of action and experience. And here's the painful irony. The more you think without acting, the more the underlying anxiety grows. Because the threat you are simulating never gets resolved. You never get the information that action would provide. You never get the evidence that you can handle outcomes. The loop tightens instead of releasing. Action is the only exit from rumination. Not better thinking, not more careful analysis. Action. Even small, imperfect, uncertain action. Because action engages the task-positive network, which quiets the default mode. It gives the brain the external anchor it has been trying to manufacture internally. I want to address something directly because it is one of the most misunderstood dimensions of this experience. There is a significant difference between the person who overthinks because their standards are too high and the person who overthinks because their tolerance for uncertainty is too low. And these require completely different responses. The person with high standards believes that more thinking will produce a better outcome. They are trying to optimize. They believe that the right answer exists and that thinking harder will find it. The trap for this person is the assumption that uncertainty can be eliminated through thought. It cannot. At some point, all decisions involve stepping into the unknown with incomplete information. The goal is not a perfect decision. The goal is a good enough decision made in time. The person with low tolerance for uncertainty believes that more thinking will produce the feeling of safety. They are not trying to optimize. They are trying to feel ready. They are trying to reduce the anxiety of not knowing. And for this person, more thinking never actually reduces the anxiety, because the thing they are anxious about is uncertainty itself. And uncertainty cannot be resolved by any amount of analysis. Knowing which of these you are changes what you actually need to do. The optimizer needs to practice what psychologists call satisficing, making the best decision available with the information currently at hand and releasing the pursuit of the perfect option. The uncertainty avoider needs something different. They need repeated experience of moving into uncertainty without catastrophe so that their nervous system can update its threat assessment. Both require the same fundamental move. At some point, you stop thinking and you go. Here's the practical side of this, because I want to give you something that actually changes something, not just a framework for understanding. The first thing, learn to distinguish between thinking that is productive and thinking that is repetitive. This sounds obvious, but almost nobody actually does it in practice. Here's a simple test. Ask yourself, have I had this exact thought or a version of it before? If the answer is yes, and if having it before did not produce a resolution, then having it again will not produce a resolution either. You are in a loop. The loop is not going to exit through more looping. When you notice you are in a loop, do not try to stop the thought. Trying to stop a thought is one of the least effective strategies known to psychology. Thought suppression, the deliberate attempt to not think about something, almost universally increases the frequency of the unwanted thought. Instead, change the input. Move your body. Go outside. Do something with your hands. Change the physical environment you are in. Give the task-positive network something external to anchor to. The internal loop cannot sustain itself when the brain is genuinely engaged with something external. The second thing, create what I call a decision container. Most chronic overthinkers do not have a clear structure for when a decision ends. The thinking continues indefinitely, because there is no defined stopping point. A decision container is simply a limit. Before you begin thinking about a decision, you decide when you will stop thinking and act, not when you will have all the information, not when you feel completely ready, just when. Set the boundary before the thinking begins, then honor it. The third thing, practice tolerating the discomfort of incompleteness. This is the hardest one. Most overthinking is fundamentally an attempt to achieve a feeling of completeness, of having covered every angle, of being fully prepared. That feeling almost never arrives, but the search for it can consume years. The shift is learning to act from incomplete information and surviving the discomfort that follows. Not eliminating the discomfort, surviving it. Because every time you act without certainty and the outcome is manageable, your nervous system learns something it cannot learn any other way. It learns that you can handle outcomes you did not fully predict. And that evidence, accumulated over time, is the only thing that actually loosens the grip of the loop. I want to close with what I believe is the most important point in this entire conversation. And it is not about techniques. It is about something much more fundamental. People who think too much are not, as they are often told, overthinking because they are too smart for their own good. Nor are they overthinking because they are anxious or weak or lacking in discipline. They are overthinking because somewhere along the way, they learned that thinking was safer than doing, that the world inside their head was more controllable than the world outside it. That preparation was protection. That analysis was armor. And for a time, perhaps for a very long time, that strategy served them. It kept them careful. It kept them from certain kinds of mistakes. It may even have kept them from certain kinds of pain. But here's what I want you to hold. The mind that is always in preparation is never an experience. And a life spent preparing to live is not quite the same thing as actually living it. The version of you that is stuck inside the loop is not your most capable self. It is your most defended self. It is the part of you that chose safety over contact, certainty over aliveness, the familiar ache of the loop over the unfamiliar risk of stepping out. Your thinking is not the problem. The problem is that you have been using your thinking as a place to live. And thinking was never designed to be a home. It was designed to be a tool. Something you pick up, use, and put down. Something that serves the life you are building, not something that replaces it. The life is out there. It is in the conversation you have not had yet, the decision you have not made, the thing you have been preparing to do for longer than you can explain. The version of you that simply walks into it, without certainty, without complete preparation, without the feeling of being ready. That version of you does not think less than you do. It thinks differently. It thinks enough to decide, and then it moves. Because here's what I have come to believe. Clarity does not come before action. It comes from action. The thinking that feels like it is building toward a moment of readiness is almost never doing what it promises. The readiness comes later, on the other side of the thing you were afraid to begin. So whatever it is that you have been circling, whatever thought you have had 10 times this week without resolution, whatever decision is sitting in that loop that has been running for too long, I want to ask you something. What would you do right now, today, if you accepted that you are already prepared enough? I believe the answer is already there. I believe you have been ready for longer than you think. I believe the loop will not end through one more revolution. It will end the moment you step out of it. And I think part of you already knows that. Thank you so much for being here. If this episode landed somewhere real for you, leave me a comment. Tell me what thought you have been looping on, because you are not alone in this. And sometimes just naming the loop out loud is the first step towards something different.